Chapter 13. Mit Geeks, We Like Computers. January 28, 1996, Alpha Chi Gamma, Fraternity, Massachusetts, Institute of Technology, Cambridge, Massachusetts, United States of America. Harold Francis Chu grinned as he looked at the grid. Almost half of the men in his house had participated in the Super Bowl pool. One of the walls in the had covered with a 10x10 grid of squares, where each brother could spend $5 to put his name in a square. Multiple entries were permitted, so someone could spend $10 to take 2 squares. Once all 100 squares had been filled in, the rows and columns were marked with random permutations of the numbers 0 through 9. The contest was simple. The last digit of the Steelers' final score marked out a column, and the last digit of the Cowboys' final score indicated a row. The man whose name appeared at the intersection of these 2 blocks of squares won the $500 prize. Harold's 2 squares had worked out to be Dallas 4, Pittsburgh 4, and Dallas 3, Pittsburgh 7. The first square probably wouldn't work out all that well. After all, the game couldn't end 14-14 or 24-24. On the other hand, 3-7 was much more reasonable. 13-7, 7-3, and so forth were not uncommon football scores. Regardless of who won the pool, however, Harold would come out ahead. He was a hotshot computer geek who owned programs which would allow people to convert film to digitized images. Once the game was over, he digitized the film and put it on his website. He found the internet amazing, with the entire world at his fingertips. Most elite universities had web access, as did a few big companies. About 2/3 of MIT consisted of men. A 2:1 ratio of men to women made it difficult for guys to get dates. Harold's roommate had managed to pick up a girl, much to Harold's envy. When Harold asked him for help, the roommate had told him that he needed to try to think of ways which would make him different from all the other guys. Something which would make him appeal more to girls. Most of the girls Harold knew weren't as interested in sports as the guys. However, they were interested in humor, technology, and to some extent pop culture. The Super Bowl would be a perfect excuse for him to attract women. He'd be showing off his computer know-how and would be using his skills to provide material which would allow the women to review the always noteworthy TV commercials which accompanied the game. Harold had offered to record the game so that the men of his fraternity would be able to watch it at a later date. There were a couple of guys from Dallas and one from Pittsburgh, and they'd been really happy that the game was going to be recorded. Little did the guys know that he'd be taking advantage of the recording to help bolster his credentials as a dateable geek, and if the recording didn't serve him well at MIT, well, he always had Wellesley and Harvard. He knew he'd find a girl at some point. The Athena computer system required that the students master Unix. That was Unix, not Unix. For the time being, however, all he could do is record the game and hope for the best. He pressed record, settled back into the chair, and began watching the game with the rest of his house. 60 minutes of football later, the final score was 27-17 Dallas. Eric Muncher, who had filled in the winning square, started whooping it up as soon as the final whistle had sounded. One of the few men over 21, he offered to buy all 21-plus students drinks at the Muddy Charles pub. This set many of the seniors to cheering. Harold took the videotape out of the VCR while everyone else was distracted. This would give him the chance to digitize the film before anyone else found out. Once he was done, he'd put the videotape back in the videocassette rack so no one would miss it. This was his chance, he thought. He'd better not miss it. He would have been horrified to know that 3 of his brothers were all thinking the same thing. Chapter 14. Nationwide Bulletin. January 28, 1996, United States Department of Magic, Greenwich, Massachusetts, United States of America, urgent asterisk. Statute of secrecy, potentially compromised for most United States wizard communities. Footage of wizards in flight on broomsticks, accidentally recorded during Super Bowl ad. It is the somber duty of the United States Department of Magic to report that a potentially serious breach of the statute of secrecy has just taken place. Blast Soft Drink Corporation of Tempe appears to have accidentally recorded footage of British wizards flying over London during the production of their recent Super Bowl advertisement. The clip with the wizards appears to have survived the editing process and made it into the final version of the commercial, which aired at approximately 21:30 S 1930 MST. The violation appears midway through the commercial at about the 19-second mark. It occurs when the actors are enjoying Blast Cola in London. Shortly after Jake, the male star starts touting his product on the cruise liner. An object flies directly behind him from the vantage point of the camera. The object is poorly illuminated, lit only by the boat's running lights. However, additional processing of the film will show that it is in fact a teenage boy flying on a broomstick. Due to the fact that the wizard in question is underage and well known, the British Ministry of Magic is not releasing his name. However, it should be noted that the boy had actually been concerned that the Muggles might see him and had asked an exceptionally skilled adult wizard an aura. In fact, if the man was dealing with the problem. The aura, having misunderstood the unspoken request, had thought that the boy had asked a completely different question and had nodded. As a result of this confusion, the Blast Cola employees were left with their memories and footage intact. Most of the Blast employees originally thought that the object in question was a bird. However, two of them, curious about the bird's species, did additional processing and determined that it was a boy on a broomstick. They did not believe it at first. However, one of them had the misfortune to be speaking with someone on the telephone when the person on the other end was obliviated. This left the employee with knowledge both of the wizarding community and of the fact that Muggles could be obliviated. To their credit, these employees realized that they had stumbled across something they should not have known and did what they could to prevent the news from spreading, using vague words like secret society. In fact, when confronted by an obliviator, one of them told the agent that he would be more than willing to help our community adjust to a new way of life, in case the secret was leaked to the point where it became common knowledge in the Muggle world. The Oblivators went to work trying to repair the damage. As of this report, they had gotten all of the witnesses save one, who will likely be visited by an agent within 24 hours. Unfortunately, the Oblivators were unable to keep up with modern communication technology and found out about the advertisement too late to prevent it from being shown during the Super Bowl. The Department of Magic would like to remind the wizarding community of two things. First, the odds of any one individual mistaking the object for a wizard as compared to a bird, the most likely explanation and the one being propagated by the Oblivators, are relatively low, maybe 1%. Unfortunately, there is a second issue: the sheer number of fans who watched the Super Bowl and saw the commercial. The Obliviator is estimating that up to 2 million people will realize that the object in question was a boy on a broomstick. These million people will be spread out, more or less randomly, all over the United States. This is the first major statute of secrecy leak in over 100 years. More importantly, however, it is the first major leak in the era of television, telephones, and computers. These new technologies will make containment much more difficult. Although the Obliviator himself is working long and hard on this case, among other things, by obliviating the vast majority of the spectators at the Super Bowl itself, he has raised the distinct possibility that it may not be possible to prevent the leak from spreading out of control. The issue is no longer whether we can prevent it. It is how well we can limit the damage. If we are lucky, we may be able to limit it to certain cities or to the United States as a whole. The alternative is too horrible to consider. For those of you who want more information, the case ID number is USSW003266. What it means to ordinary men and women of the American wizarding community. 1. Review your contingency plans in case the statute of secrecy is permanently breached. If you do not have plans for this, develop some as soon as you can. 2. Make all sensitive areas and sanctuaries unplottable for Muggles. Muggles will not be able to enter these safe houses even if they do learn that the wizarding world exists. 3. Although you may be somewhat afraid of the Muggle world, do not assume that the Muggles are malicious. Most Muggles are well-meaning, conscientious individuals just like you. They are far more likely to help people than hurt them. Be nice to them, and they will likely be nice to you. You should still not use magic in their presence, however, as the magic may scare them or surprise them, and it will confirm your existence to the Muggle world, spreading the leak further. 4. For those of you familiar with modern technology, be advised that there will be computer viruses combating all files mentioning the Super Bowl. No files concerning the Super Bowl will be able to be posted to the Internet. The reason is obvious. The Internet is visible worldwide, not just to the United States. If the leak does get out of hand, we do not want it spreading outside the United States. 5. Do not discuss the Super Bowl or any magical subject over the telephone or email. 6. Do not use familiars, such as owls, to deliver messages, unless the animals will be behaving in a way normal for their species. 7. If you need to travel from place to place, use Muggle transportation methods or apparition, if out of sight of Muggles. Do not fly broomsticks. If you are too young to receive an apparition license, use flu powder or ask your parents to transport you using side-along apparition. Whenever possible, apparate into unpopulated areas or under cover of darkness. 8. If you see any evidence that the Muggles are aware of the wizarding world, do not confront them. Contact your town's local authorities, and they will get in touch with an Oblivator or other trained professional. 9. Keep an eye on any Muggle outside the American Southwest who is drinking Blast Cola. This indicates that someone has paid attention to the advertisement and has bought the product. Blast had very few sales outside the Southwest before the Super Bowl. Ask them how they heard about Blast and steer them towards the commercial. If they don't mention the anomaly in London, fine. If they do, however, try to convince them it was a bird. Odds are that they will believe you. However, if they have evidence to the contrary, contact your local town authorities. 10. If you're unsure what to do, are scared, biased, or do not know how to interact with Muggles, stay away from the Muggles. 11. Wear Muggle dress whenever you are in public. Your town authorities will instruct you on your area's customs. Rest assured that the Department of Magic is working extra hours to deal with this incident. More information will be provided as soon as it comes in. The wizarding community has dealt with several issues like this over the years. We have experience, and we have the people. We at the Department of Magic believe that we will be able to resolve this incident without serious problems. End message. Chapter 15. Let's see Harry get acquitted of this. January 29, 1996. Potions, Classroom, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Great Britain. Harry Potter suspected that the only person who liked double potions was the instructor, primarily because said instructor took special pleasure in tormenting students who were not from Slytherin. Right now, the instructor was staring down his prominent, aquiline nose at the green fluid which had materialized in Harry's cauldron. Harry braced himself for the inevitable critique. Severus Snape glared at him. "Potter, what is this?" Harry cringed, but managed to keep a straight face. "It was my attempt at a shrinking potion, Professor. I think something went wrong, but I'm not sure what." "Obviously something went wrong, Potter. Either that, or it's obvious that you don't know how to identify your colors. I specifically said that the potion was supposed to be yellow. Does this look yellow to you?" He dipped a flask into Harry's cauldron, filled it with the green fluid, and showed it to the rest of the class. Hermione rolled her eyes. He could hear Draco Malfoy snicker on the other side of the room. Harry sighed. "No, sir. I'll do better next time." "I suspect you will, Potter, After all, you couldn't do any worse. 5 points from Gryffindor. The crowd grumbled as Snape vanished the flask and headed to the front of the class again. Harry couldn't imagine the day getting any worse. Snape was about to resume the lecture when Professor McGonagall's voice broke into the room. "Excuse me, Professor Snape, but may I speak with Potter for a few minutes?" Snape hesitated a moment. Harry could imagine the gears churning in the potion master's mind as the man tried to think of an appropriately biting rejoinder. Eventually, Snape shrugged and nodded. Breathing a sigh of relief, he got up and followed Professor McGonagall out of the room. The woman looked extremely troubled. Had Voldemort done something nasty? He'd never seen her this nervous before. Harry needed to know more. "Professor, what's going on? Has something happened?" McGonagall nodded. "I'm afraid so, Mr. Potter. Something very serious. Dumbledore would like to see you." It had to be Voldemort, Harry thought. On second thought, however, he changed his mind. Had it been Voldemort, Professor McGonagall would have told everyone. Could the Ministry have caught Sirius Black? That was the only other option he could think of. He followed in silence as Professor McGonagall led him over to the headmaster's tower and opened the door for him. Harry stepped into the tower and allowed the spiral staircase to carry him up. Dumbledore's study was packed. At least half of the Order of the Phoenix was there, as was Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic. Harry recognized the minister from Harry's ordeal last fall. Long faces filled the room. Clearly, something terrible had happened. He couldn't tell if it involved Voldemort or his recent trial at the Ministry of Magic. He'd find out soon enough, however. McGonagall put her hand on his shoulder for reassurance and ushered him into the room. Dumbledore seemed to have aged. His hair appeared to have gotten whiter, and the old body looked much more frail. It looked as if he hadn't slept for days. Harry turned to Dumbledore. "You asked to see me, Professor. What's wrong?" Dumbledore sighed and tried to cheer himself up. "Good morning, Harry. Please be seated. Some butterbeer." Harry shook his head. "No thanks, sir. Right now, judging from my latest lesson with Snape, no liquids appear to be agreeing with me." Dumbledore then turned very serious and looked at Harry. "Harry, a very serious incident has taken place in the United States. We have reason to believe that the statute of secrecy has been breached, possibly irreparably." Harry didn't like this at all. Had someone seen him cast the Patronus at the Dementor which had been attacking Dudley? He didn't think so. Besides, how would his use of magic in Little Winging have caused the statute of secrecy to be breached in a country thousands of miles away? He needed to know more. The statute of secrecy, breached, how so? Minister Fudge answered this question. 6 months ago, after the Dementor attack in Little Winging, members of the Order of the Phoenix flew you to our safe house on Grimmauld Place. Do you remember that, Harry? All too well, Harry thought. Yes, Minister. I'd like you to think back to that experience, Harry. Do you remember flying down the Thames and passing a boat along the way? Yes, Minister. Dumbledore stared hard at him. Harry, now this is important. Did you see unusual activity on the boat? Harry had a suspicion where this was going. Now they were asking him. Yes, Minister. I believe I saw some people filming a movie from a location near the back of the boat. I remember thinking that was odd at the time, flying so close to Muggles, but I had assumed that some of the people accompanying me were obliviating the Muggles along the way. I looked at Professor Lupin for confirmation, and he nodded yes. Professor Lupin stared at him. Damn, I remember you looking at me. I thought you were asking me if we were hiding you from Voldemort. That's why I nodded. You thought that I was checking to see if the Muggles were being obliviated. Harry turned to Lupin. Yes, Professor. Once you nodded to me, I figured the issue had been dealt with, so I didn't think much more about it. Who did the obliviation? Lupin turned to Moody. I thought you were doing it, Alastair. Moody shook his head. I was too busy thinking about our escape to deal with it. I figured someone else did. Harry turned to Moody. Who did, Professor? There was a long silence. broken finally by Dumbledore. No one, Harry. No one obliviated the film crew. We were so busy dealing with you and the dementors that we completely forgot about obliviating everyone. Harry nodded. I see. Can you track down who it was and obliviate them now? Minister Fudge responded once more. We did. Unfortunately, we did so too late. The footage filmed on the boat was made into an advertisement scene during a very popular American sporting event. It was likely seen by millions of Americans. The Obliviator in charge of the case isn't sure he'll be able to keep this under wrap much longer, and he's starting to take more and more drastic measures. The minister paused. It appears, Harry, that you're going to be pretty popular in the United States, particularly given your ability to fly a broomstick. Harry stared at the minister in horror. He knew how Aunt and Uncle reacted to wizards. If the rest of the Muggle world was like that, the wizarding community was in deep trouble. He turned to Dumbledore. That's terrible, sir. What are we going to do? Dumbledore shook his head slowly. I don't know, Harry. I honestly don't know. Chapter 16. The Fall Guys. January 29, 1996. Gryffindor Common Room Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Great Britain Hermione, and Ron stared as the portrait door opened and Harry entered the room. They hadn't liked the look on Professor McGonagall's face when she had come to retrieve Harry from potions. Granted, an angry McGonagall would likely be nicer to Harry than a neutral Snape, but they'd never seen McGonagall that troubled, even during the Chamber of Secrets crisis. Harry had been crying. He had done what he could to cover his tears before entering the common room, but Hermione and Ron knew him well enough to know the truth. His eyes were glazed over, as if in shock. Clearly, something horrible had happened. Harry turned his moist eyes to Ron and Hermione, and they followed them into an empty corridor. Apparently, this information was for their eyes only. Hermione could only think of one thing. The Ministry had caught Sirius Black, very likely due to Professor Umbridge's help. Harry had lost the only father he had ever known. He would be forced to spend the next few years with the Dursleys. Hermione asked him first, Good grief, Harry, what's wrong? You look a mess. Harry told it to her straight and simple. I've been suspended from Hogwarts by the order of Cornelius Fudge himself. I'm going to be taking the next train back to civilization, where I will be placed under house arrest at the Burrow for the foreseeable future. Be thankful I'm not 17, for I would have been sent to Azkaban in that case. Harry looked down at his wand. At least I get to keep my wand and Hedwig. I may be imprisoned, but I'll still be a wizard, and the Burrow is significantly a better prison than the Dursleys. Hermione stared at him. How could he arrest you? You were acquitted of all charges in the Dementor incident. An angry look flashed into Harry's face. I was acquitted, all right. Fat good that does me, however. I'm being arrested because dear old Fudge is using me as a scapegoat so he can salvage his political career and make a statement. Dumbledore's been forced to resign as well, incidentally. He'll be leaving Hogwarts at the end of the year. Professor McGonagall will be the new headmistress. Ron stared at him. Dumbledore's been sacked. Harry shook his head. Technically, he hasn't. He was just convinced to retire. However, everyone knows that Fudge is pulling the strings here. He paused once again. And believe it or not, that's not the worst of it. There will be ramifications to this which will go far beyond Vald. He who must not be named. Harry glared at him. Ron, don't irritate me right now. I've got enough stuff to worry about. Hermione summoned some chairs from the common room into the corridor. All right, Harry, tell us everything. They all sat down, and Harry took a deep breath. You may recall that shortly after the Dementor incident, the Order of the Phoenix whisked me off to 12 Grimmauld Place, the Order's headquarters. En route to Grimmauld Place, we flew down the Thames. Hermione nodded. Yes, I remember that. Harry braced himself. Well, it appeared that an American soft drink company was recording a television commercial from a boat on the Thames. The commercial recorded footage of me on my broomstick. Ron stared at Hermione. Television, what's that? Hermione rolled her eyes. A method Muggles use for mass communication through pictures communicate. Programs transmitted using this device often include advertisements or commercials in order to pay the costs of the transmissions. Some Muggles were making an advertisement on the boat and accidentally filmed Harry. Ron stared at him. You mean the statute of secrecy was breached after all, albeit for a completely separate reason? Harry nodded. I'm afraid so. Ron, needless to say, the American Oblivators got to work trying to contain the leak. Unfortunately, they found out too late to plug it completely. For a long time, it looked like the Oblivators would eventually gain the upper hand and suppress knowledge of the wizarding world. He took a deep breath. Everything changed, however, approximately 12 hours ago when this advertisement was shown during the Super Bowl. Ron didn't know what the Super Bowl was. Hermione, however, did. The blood drained from her face. Oh my God, oh my God. Ron turned to her. What's the Super Bowl? Hermione put her head in her hands. It is one of the biggest sporting events in the United States. It's the championship match of American football, and it's well known for having unusual commercials. These commercials are often watched by 100 million people, if not more. Ron stared at her and then at Harry. You mean to tell me that 100 million people just found out that wizards exist? Harry nodded. That is quite possible. The only good news is that the Muggles couldn't see me all that well, and the official notices claim that I was actually an exotic bird. Unfortunately, latest estimates indicate that of those 100 million people, about 1 million people will eventually notice that this bird is actually a boy on a broomstick. Hermione shook her head. Please tell me that the American Oblivators will be able to contain this. Harry shook his head. They're not optimistic, Hermione. These million people are scattered all over the country. It's reached the point where the Oblivators are trying to minimize the damage. There's no way to stop the breach. However, right now they're predicting a 30–40% chance that there is going to be no way to stop it. The statute of secrecy may be gone for good, and the wizarding community will be at the mercy of the Muggles all around the world. Ron and Hermione couldn't believe what they were hearing. They were struck speechless as Harry continued. Right now they're trying to restrict the outbreak to certain American cities and towns. Everything is going to depend, however, on whether the leak is going to be able to get out of the country. In particular, the Oblivators are worried that information is going to leak out onto the internet. Once it's on the internet, it's in the public domain, and it's on a machine. Obliviation won't work on a machine. Once it's on the internet, we might as well introduce ourselves. Nothing will be able to prevent worldwide exposure at this point. Ron stared at Harry again. The internet. A linked network of computers, powerful machines, which connect to each other all over the world. Once information is put on one of them, virtually anyone with another computer in the network can read it, regardless of which country he or she is in. Hermione stared at him. This is terrible. Are you sure it isn't because of, you know who? Harry thought for a moment. Something tells me it's not you know who. He doesn't seem to be interested in Muggles, especially outside of Britain. The soft drink company making the film is American. From what the wizarding brass gather, the re-emergence of Voldemort and the statute of secrecy breach just happened to occur at the same time by sheer coincidence. Neither Ron nor Hermione could say anything. Here is how Dumbledore and I figure into this and why I'm getting punished. The American Secretary of Magic is furious at Fudge for not obliviating the film crew on the moment. However, it is more than obvious that there was nothing the people accompanying me could have done. I had thought Lupin was taking care of it, Lupin thought Moody was taking care of it, and Moody thought Lupin was. Everything thought someone else would handle it, so it fell through the cracks. And I couldn't ask who was handling it, because the Muggles might hear us. Fudge, as you know, isn't particularly fond of me and Dumbledore. He isn't a strong leader. He's also trying to convince himself and the rest of Britain that you know who has not returned. He needs to do something to appease the Americans and to show the people of Britain that he can still be trusted. What does he do? He takes advantage of the fact that I've been known to flaunt the statute of secrecy and blames me, even though I didn't do it. This buys off the Americans, and it will make him look like he's working on solving the problem if the breach spreads to this side of the pond. He basically throws me to the wolves in order to save his own skin. Typical politician. Hermione stared at him. He can't do that. Dumbledore will protect you. He tried, Hermione. He tried. Unfortunately, Dumbledore's demands just pushed a panicking Fudge to the breaking point. Fudge forced Dumbledore into retirement, threatening to send him to Azkaban if he persisted in his defiance of the lawfully elected leader of the British wizarding community. McGonagall will take over as headmistress. Dolores Umbridge will be promoted to deputy headmistress. We both know that Umbridge and McGonagall hate each other's guts. Life at Hogwarts will likely become a lot more interesting. It's a pity I won't be there to see it. How will the DA and the struggle against you-know-who and Umbridge, for that matter, survive without your leadership? I don't know, Hermione. I don't know. However, if there's anyone smart enough to figure out how to get out of this mess, it's you, Hermione. I'm putting you in charge with Ron as your second. Do what you can. Hopefully, the breach will be contained, and I will be allowed to return to school. Hermione was about to respond when she saw a flash of pink out of the corner of her eye. An intimidating filled the air. It didn't take a wizard to realize that Dolores Umbridge had walked into the hall. The toad-like woman smiled at Harry. "Ready to go, Mr. Potter. You should hurry up and pack your things. The train back to London leaves in half an hour. I'll be accompanying you back to the Burrow just to make sure you don't get lost along the way." Harry closed his eyes and turned away from Umbridge. "In a moment, Professor. In a moment." He shook Ron and Hermione's hands. "Keep everything going, my friends, and wait for the time when I'll be able to return and free you from all forms of injustice." He nodded slightly at Umbridge. "Forever." Hermione tried to say something, but never got the chance as Umbridge shoved Harry back out into the common room, possibly never to be seen again. Chapter 17. The Breach Goes International. January 29, 1996, Sung's tropical bar outside camp, classified as Army Base, classified South Korea. James L. stood at attention, absolutely speechless. What a wonder! For the first time, Colonel J had actually done something to cheer up the troops. The man had a reputation of being an absolute martinet, maintaining military discipline at all times. The colonel had earned several colorful nicknames, such as King David, Jay the Barbarian, and Davy Owns Lockdown. However, apparently even the colonel couldn't deny that the Super Bowl was an American tradition. When you were trying to maintain morale all the way on the other side of the world, you needed to provide enough reminders of home to keep your men sane. Football was popular among the men at his base. James was actually a halfway decent wide receiver. As a result, it was only natural that the colonel would allow the men to watch the game at night. The game had started at roughly 12 hours ago, around 8:30 local time. With access to the internet and telephones restricted in the unit, James had no idea who had won. Speculation was rampant, but the colonel had planned well. As a result, the men were absolutely stunned when the colonel called them into a meeting and told them that they were going to be watching a tape of the game tonight. It was now 2100 hours, and Sung's tropical bar was packed. Men in uniform were everywhere. Mr. Sung was serving beer until halftime. Several of Miss Howe's women were there as well in case several of the men wanted to celebrate a victory or wanted to get their mind off a defeat. Miss Howe knew that everyone liked a man in a uniform. Normally, the colonel did not allow his men to enjoy camaraderie while on deployment. For one night, however, he figured he'd let everyone celebrate. The bar was also filled with parrots, macaws, and other tropical birds. Some flew around the room freely, occasionally perching on patrons' shoulders. Others strutted around in cages. The building had been equipped with a virtual airlock, a pair of doors of which only one could be open at a time to prevent the birds from escaping. Apparently, the proprietor, Mr. Sung, was a fan of unusual wildlife and had a respectable collection of tropical birds and beasts. James had already tricked Eric into betting $50 on the Steelers. It was fairly obvious that the Cowboys were going to win, even Las Vegas admitted it. However, Eric was from the Pittsburgh area and refused to admit defeat. James remembered smiling as he shook Eric's hand after the bet. He knew he'd be smiling much more once Eric handed over the $50. He called over the bartender and asked for a local microbrew. Sung had several local favorites on the shelf, selected one at random, and handed it over. Unlike many of the people who ran bars for the soldiers, the bartender spoke a decent amount of English. It was slightly accented, but it could have been a hell of a lot worse. James couldn't figure out how much he was permitted to relax. The colonel was here, sitting in the back. He seemed stone-cold sober. This probably put a few limits on what James could do. He'd have to stay in uniform, not that he wouldn't have wanted to show off the uniform to attract girls, and not do anything that he would regret once the colonel came back to his old self the next morning. The crowd roared as the colonel reached into his attaché case and withdrew the precious tape. Smiling, James hadn't realized that the colonel even knew how to smile. He presented the tape to Mr. Sung. Mr. Sung bowed in acknowledgement and headed over to the VCR. The tape began with the Star-Spangled Banner, the first few notes of which were drowned out by half-drunk soldiers jumping to their feet and saluting sharply. The first few commercials went by and the game began. James was interested in both the commercials and the game. Granted, he'd have to keep an eye on the game as he had $50 riding on it. The commercials, however, served as a good humor break. Some of the commercials were actually funny. Others had well-known jingles and themes, which allowed all of the men to join in. "We're talking 'bout Budweiser." James had thought about joining in. However, he had to spend his time trying to plug his ears. The people who had recorded the commercial could sing. 200 drunk men, however, could not. Even worse was the fact that they couldn't sing on key either. He caught a glimpse of the colonel out of the corner of his eye and was amused to find that he was wincing and had fingers in his ears as well. Apparently, the colonel had more brains in that bowling ball bald head than James had expected. Midway through the second quarter, he saw a commercial for a product he'd never seen before. Blast Cola. What the hell was Blast Cola? He'd have to look into trying it out when he got home. He doubted that they served Blast Cola all the way out here. The Blast Cola commercial featured a hot couple traveling all over the world, drinking Blast wherever they went. James would sleep with the girl in a heartbeat. Judging from the reactions of the other men in the room, he wasn't alone. Several men hooted loudly, only to find their hoots muffled quickly by a resigned, yet stern glance from the colonel. Halftime was punctuated by a rush of people heading to the bar asking for Blast Cola. Poor Sung, James thought. James watched as the bartender tried to explain that he'd never heard of the cola before and as a result couldn't offer any. Several men booed loudly, James included. The boos eventually turned to cheers as Mr. Sung promised to take a closer look at the new soft drinks commercial and figure out where to get it from. James giggled as Mr. Sung added that he wanted to take a better look at that bird, which had flown by during the London segment. He hadn't recognized the species at first glance, and he was considering adding a specimen to his collection. Mr. Sung might actually be able to do that, James thought. The colonel wasn't stupid enough to allow the men to keep the Super Bowl tape. They'd spend all their time replaying it instead of drilling. Instead, the colonel had given the tape to Sung to whatever he wanted with it. Grinning, James turned back to the game. He was determined to make the best of the one day the colonel actually let boys be boys. Chapter 18. Damn those NFL viruses. January 29, 1996, Alpha Chi Gamma, Fraternity Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge. Massachusetts, United States of America. Howard Chu was furious. He'd been able to digitize the commercials without a problem, particularly that interesting one where the lady had nearly been hit by a bird. That had been the hard part. He had been able to link the files to his web page. Yet every single time he had tried to view the files, after reloading the web page, the files had disappeared. What was going on here? The only thing he could think of was that NBC or the NFL didn't want footage from the Super Bowl running around on the internet for some reason. Maybe they were trying to get people to buy tapes of the game and wanted a monopoly on Super Bowl videos, including those of its commercials. If that were the case, however, they could be outwitted. They hadn't counted on hotshot software engineers desperate to pick up a girl. Howard liked studying linguistics as a hobby and had learned a lot of interesting trivia about languages and the way the mind processes words. He was already fluent in 3 languages: Korean, Chinese, and English. He had compiled a long list of the similarities and differences between the 3 languages which, he hoped, could eventually be turned into a paper or thesis. One of the more unusual quirks of the human mind was that more often than not, people fluent in English would be able to understand a written sentence if all of the words were replaced with their anagrams, provided that the first and last letter stayed in their proper place. For instance, most readers would be able to process sentences like Msot Ardares, W loud B alb to PR coes SCT. He had a sneaky suspicion that computers did not have this ability. He tried once more to store the video on the computer. This time, however, he changed the caption from Super Bowl 1996 commercials to Super Bowl 1996 commercials, deliberately introducing a typo which would confuse a computer but not a human. He held his breath, saved the page, and hit reload. Bingo, that did the job. He had successfully bypassed the NFL's tricks and managed to post the video. It was now time to spread the news to the sororities. He had friends in Alpha Phi, Alpha Chi Omega, and Sigma Kappa. He'd often wanted them to be more than friends, but for some reason they didn't seem to like the idea. He prepared an email telling them about the video and sent it off, copying himself. 10 minutes later, he hadn't received his own email. What the hell? Curious, he instant messaged one of the AXO girls who happened to be online and asked her if she'd received his email. She said he hadn't, so he tried sending it again. Same result. This was getting ridiculous, he thought. He knew that the NFL didn't like people retransmitting videos of the Super Bowl. However, preventing people from sending emails was a bit much. On the other hand, the NFL was wealthy enough to ensure that elite players earned millions of dollars per year. Howard had a suspicion that they had purchased technology, which even he hadn't been aware of. Exasperated, he examined his window, indicating which friends of his were online and which computers they were on. He walked over to his roommate, who had happened to be a few aisles of computers away on the top floor of the student center. He tried to not let his exasperation show. "Kevin, I've got a problem. You know the plan I had to post the Super Bowl commercials online to try to attract women? The NFL seems to have a lot of safeguards in place to prevent people from posting pirated copies of the game. I was able to work around them, however, by saving the file using an intentional typo. Now I'm having trouble emailing Anna, Michelle, and Marcy and myself, reporting that I've managed to get the stuff online. I don't want to have to throw in random typos everywhere to circumvent the NFL's viruses." Kevin nodded. "I see. Here's what I suggest. I'll ask my girlfriend to post a written note on the bulletin boards in McCormick, the all-women's dorm. The note will include the link, typos, and all. If you want to attract girls, that's a good place to start. What's more, she told me she knows someone in Alpha Chi Omega. I'll see if I can get her to tell the AXO girl so she can forward the message off to the Pan-Hellenic organization. Hopefully, that will get the message across. And don't forget Wellesley and Harvard, of course." You can just take the one bus to get to Harvard, and you can always hop on the shuttle to Wellesley. You can post notes everywhere you go." Howard smiled. "That should work. Thanks for your help." "No problem, Howie. How'd you make out during the game?" "I won $50 from poor Eric. You?" "I made out pretty well myself. However, I didn't win any money." Howard frowned. "Then how?" Then it hit him, and he rolled his eyes in frustration. Kevin meant well, but it was obvious that he had to go to charm school. Chapter 19. Atlantis Overwhelmed. January 29, 1996, International Confederation of Warlocks Headquarters Atlantis in Seagrease. The Situation Room was packed. Virtually every staff member, Oblivator, and Aura had been called in on short notice to deal with the crisis. Most of the staff had come with their wands at the ready and spells on their lips, thinking that Voldemort's forces had tried to take over the Iqua headquarters. They had been relieved to know that Voldemort was still keeping a low profile for the time being. Unfortunately, the relief lasted just as long as it took for the Grand Coven to brief the visitors as to what had happened. Although there seemed to be some disagreement over Voldemort's return, former Grand Mugwump Albus Dumbledore personally vouched for it. Given the notoriety of that particular dark wizard, Diolanus had deemed it wise to keep an eye out for him. Although Atlantis was still unable to intervene in national politics, even with the breach, the situation had only reached DEFCON 4, it didn't hurt to be prepared. The Super Bowl crisis was serious enough that several people had been pulled off Voldemort-related projects to deal with the problem. Grand Mugwump Diolanus had been leading the International Confederation for a good 50 years, and even he couldn't think of a time when a crisis had been serious enough to warrant understaffing of departments dedicated to finding and incarcerating dark wizards. He doubted that there would be another crisis of this magnitude for a good 200 years, if not more. Things already looked bad, and the incident had only taken place less than 24 hours ago. The center of the room had been cleared out and replaced with a huge, three-dimensional illusion of the Earth's surface. Places which had reported statute of secrecy violations had been marked in yellow, and cases where Oblivators were having trouble contain the leak were marked in red. There were a few gray areas marking possible death, either safe houses, but those were unimportant for the time being. There were yellow darts up all the way up and down the American eastern seaboard. Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh were easily identifiable thanks to the large red coronas surrounding them. Denver had a few darts, as did St. Louis and Houston. Blocks of red and yellow were spilling out of the Phoenix area. Undoubtedly people who had managed to evade strong bears attempted obliviation at the stadium itself. Diolanus looked nervously at the clusters of darts in New York and Los Angeles. He didn't want breaches in the big cities. Eventually, the news broadcasts would find out and announce it to virtually everyone in the neighborhood, and then some. Someone behind him swore and turned to him. "Sir, we've got a breach in South Korea now. Someone's got a videotape and showing it to his friends." Diolanus stared at the technician. "South Korea? What? How?" "I'm not sure, sir. We're working on it." This was bad news, Diolanus thought. If the breach went international, there was virtually no hope of containing the leak. "Have the Oblivators there been notified?" "Yes, sir. They've managed to pinpoint the source of the breach and are closing in on him now. It appears to be a bar near us army base." Diolanus swore. The American soldiers had probably watched the Super Bowl in the bar. Now he had to deal the possibility of drunk soldiers as well as several excitable Koreans calling each other. Does Seoul think the Oblivators are going to be able to contain it? If this leaves, the United States were sunk. The technician threw his hands up in the air. "They're not sure, sir. There's evidence of a great deal of telephone traffic. Some of it appears to be in Korean." "How many copies of the tape does the bar have? Are they giving multiple copies out?" "I don't know, sir." "Find out and get back to me." Yes, sir. He turned his attention back to the globe just as the cluster of yellow lights appeared on the Korean peninsula. Wizards all around the room gasped in surprise and horror. The spread of the breach to Asia meant that it was looking less and less likely that the wizards would be able to contain it. The wizarding communities in Asia were not as organized as they were in Europe and the Americas. Another technician turned to him. Sir, we've just gotten an update from Greenwich. There are several sources in Massachusetts, Virginia, and Texas which are attempting to download Super Bowl commercial data onto the internet. Most of them are in Massachusetts, in the city of Cambridge. Dialonis swore. Mitt and Harvard, smart kids. I assume the virus is holding up. Yes, sir. None of them have made it onto the internet. I'll tell you if anything gets through. Dialonis nodded. Please do, Giovanni. To be honest, though, at the rate things are going, keeping it off the internet isn't going to save us in the long run. It will probably give us a few more hours, if we're lucky, days. The technician departed, and Dialonis turned back to the slowly rotating globe. Another yellow light popped up in Germany. Ramstein Air Base, probably. More soldiers watching the game. It dawned on him that American soldiers deployed abroad may be doing more damage than the citizens living at home were. The technician who had reported on the South Korea incident swore, Damn, we've got something coming out of Taiwan. I think it's a news broadcast. Judging from what the translator is saying, apparently some Chu family in Taiwan just received an internet link with the Super Bowl commercials on it from their son. I'm not sure how many of the Chinese believe it, though I hope they don't. Dialonis wanted to scream. I thought we were catching all the internet leaks. Well, it looks like we aren't. I don't know how it got through, but it did. The Oblivators in Taipei are already en route to Tainan, the site of the violation, but if it's managed to get onto the internet despite the virus. It was time for drastic measures. Tell Taiwan that if they don't get that thing off the internet in 30 minutes, they're going to be Avada Kedavra. The technician stared at him. Sir. The technician hesitated and gulped. Yes, sir. Dialonis had no intention of actually executing the Taiwanese agents. However, he really needed to get them to focus on the problem and resolve it quickly. There wasn't much time left to salvage the issue. In fact, he had an awful suspicion that situation couldn't be salvaged. He squared his shoulders and sighed. It was time to prepare the wizards for a brand new world. And thanks to the agents in Greenwich and Fourth Mesa, he knew exactly where to begin. Chapter 20, 2 Weeks' Notice. January 30, 1996, Sanders' residence of Prescott, Arizona, United States of America. Isaac Sanders knew that it was only a matter of time until the wizards came for him. They'd gotten all of the other Blast employees who had figured out that the bird was actually a person. Perhaps he'd lucked, because he'd been living in the suburbs. The commercial had been a great success. Several new companies had begun ordering Blast, at least in small quantities. The Stop and Shop chain had decided to carry it as well. And in perhaps the most bizarre twist of fate, a bar in South Korea, of all places, had ordered 300 bottles of it. Blast was now on the map. The company wasn't ready to compete with Coke or Pepsi just yet. However, they were probably going to be able to make some decent inroads into Sprite and Dr. Pepper's territory. The $3 million investment was likely going to produce a good $20, $30 million in profits, an amount which had surprised even the CEO. What no one had anticipated, of course, was the fact that Blast would get a lot of publicity simply for filming those wizards during the commercial. The company, at Sanders's urging, had repeatedly issued statements that the object flying past the actors in London had been a bird, and that was that. Unfortunately, it had reached the point where the evidence was overwhelming. The receptionist had already fielded no fewer than 50 calls asking them to double-check their records to make sure that it was really a bird. Judging from the tapes the callers had made of the game, it was clearly evident that under the right circumstances, The viewers could see that the object was in fact a boy on a broom. As if that were not bad enough, 3 people had called and had the audacity to ask if Blast was part of a conspiracy to pretend the wizards didn't exist. Melissa still believed him, however. Unfortunately, her friends begged to differ. From what he'd heard, half of her knitting club had picked up and hightailed out up north to Sedona to see if any of the witches were there. Everyone knew that there was something going on there, what with all those vortices and stuff. Sanders suspected that those vortices were completely fictitious. The wizards wouldn't have done anything which would have allowed ordinary people to detect them. Then again, how did he know? Maybe the vortices had been wizard work all along, and they'd been obliviating him every time he went there. His co-workers had already been divided into 2 camps, those who believed that the object was a person, and those who believed that it was a bird. He knew it was a wizard, of course. However, he couldn't actually say that. He knew how the wizards would be affected by exposure to the world. People would ask them to produce love potions and try to force them to rescue people out of burning buildings. He had no idea if the wizards even had those abilities, and even if they did have those abilities, whether they would even be willing to use them to help ordinary people like himself. He suspected that if a wizard saw someone in distress and was allowed to use magic in public, he would almost certainly help the victim. If he were forced to work for ordinary folk, however, he would probably get angry and start casting spells around. He wondered what obliviation was like. Would he suffer greatly? He could imagine the wizards being quite upset over the events of the past 24 hours. Especially since it was becoming increasingly obvious, since Stern had been obliviated, that all of the attempts to stop the rumors from spreading had failed. He had the horrifying notion that the entire wizarding community would be lining up to punish him and the rest of Blast for their accidental discovery. He headed into his bedroom to think about this and try to calm down. It was only then that he noticed that someone had entered his bedroom. The man appeared to be a full-blooded Navajo. He looked to be in his late 30s and was quite handsome. He was wearing an expensive cashmere suit and a watch of an unusual design. He also looked extremely tired, as if he hadn't slept in 48 hours. There were circles under his eyes, and his suit appeared to have contracted a few wrinkles. The man looked like he was about to fall over, and he had to brace himself against the doorframe to keep himself up. However, his eyes betrayed an even stronger emotion, resignation and fear, as if something had happened which had ruined his life. The visitor sighed and turned to face Sanders. "Good evening, sir. I apologize for the inconvenience, but are you Isaac Sanders?" Sanders had a suspicion he knew who this was, especially since he hadn't seen the man enter the room. "I am, sir. How can I help you?" "My name is Alexander Parkman. You may refer to me as Strong Bear." "Pleased to meet you, Strong Bear. Am I correct in thinking you belong to a certain society which my group inadvertently exposed?" Strong Bear nodded. "I am, Mr. Sanders. May we speak freely? Are there any recording devices around or other people?" Sanders nodded. "No, Strong Bear. My wife is en route to Sedona trying to get her knitting club to come to their senses." "Good. That will make things easier." Strong Bear paused for a moment. "As you undoubtedly suspect, I am a wizard, Mr. Sanders, and a fully trained Dine shaman. My specialty is memory charms, a spell which can be used to alter someone's memories so that they forget a certain event or events." Sanders nodded slowly. "The obliviation spell. Stern told me about it." "That is correct, Mr. Sanders. Several days ago, before the Super Bowl advertisement was aired, my supervisors received word of the fact that several employees at Blast Soft Drink Corporation may have accidentally filmed wizards flying on broomsticks. I have been busy since then tracking down everyone who has seen this footage and tampering with their memories so that they no longer have any evidence of our existence. I take it that you witnessed an obliviation and managed to keep your memories. If I may ask, how can that be? That would be a serious oversight in our training." Sanders paced around the room. It was fairly obvious, Strong Bear. One day I spoke with Stern about the wizards. It was he, in fact, who convinced me that the anomaly was in fact a boy on a broomstick. When I called him back during halftime of the Super Bowl, he seemed to have no recollection of any wizards. I take it you or someone else must have erased his memories at some point in between. Strong Bear nodded. Indeed, Mr. Sanders, that is correct. I cast the obliviation spell shortly after the commercial was aired. I actually had to obliviate the entire stadium that night, Mr. Sanders, without being seen. It wasn't easy, and I think maybe 5% of the people got away. However, I had to do my best. Sanders frowned grimly. And now you've come to obliviate me. The obliviator hesitated for a moment, drew a deep breath, and replied, I am under orders to obliviate you and anyone you know who has seen this video. Strong Bear paused once more. Sanders wondered whether it would all be for the best. He'd survived for almost 30 years without knowing about wizards. He wouldn't lose much. He was surprised, however, when Strong Bear shook his head. These are orders, however, which I do not think it would be prudent to fulfill. When I received these orders 2 days ago, the goal was to prevent the knowledge of our community to reach the outside world. It is clear at this point that we will be unsuccessful in this endeavor, now that computers and television have become so prevalent. Consequently, I believe a new approach is needed. Sanders stared at the Obliviator. What was going on? He was then floored when the Obliviator paced around the room for a bit and then looked back at him with desperation on his face. Son, I need your help. We need your help. Sanders blinked. I'm more than willing to help you, Strong Bear. However, what can I do? I'm not a wizard. It is now fairly obvious that it is only a matter of time until the world of Muggles, that is, non-magical people like yourself, will have to come to terms with the fact that there is a community of wizards living in their midst. We wizards will have to learn to deal with Muggles more openly. We cannot afford to have a confrontation between the two groups, as inevitably that would lead to worldwide conflict and very likely the genocide of the wizarding community. Many people are considering the exposure to be a fait accompli and are advocating that the Secretary of Magic contact President Clinton. It is obvious that both you and Stern were horrified by what you had done to our community and that both of you were dedicated to preventing the knowledge from spreading any further. I regretted obliviating Stern as soon as I did it, and I fully admit that I may have overreacted there. I'm not going to make the same mistake with you, however. The wizard came up to Sanders's side and put his hand on Sanders's shoulder. I would like to offer you a position as special advisor to the Dine Center for Sorcery and Shamanism in Fourth Mesa, Arizona. It's in the Dine Reservation. Sanders frowned. Fourth Mesa? There's no Fourth Mesa. I only know First, Second, and Third Mesa. Strong Bear grinned. I'm aware of that, Mr. Sanders. Fourth Mesa is not visible to Muggles. Most important wizarding locations have spells cast upon them so that ordinary people cannot see them or know they exist. Sanders whistled. Impressive. You must be very powerful. We can do things most Muggles can't. That is definitely true. However, there are limitations as to what we can do. I can't get into them right now, but you'll learn over time. At any rate, back to the job. Your task will be to describe what life is like in the Muggle world, and how the wizards can learn to adapt to such an environment. In return, the wizards will learn how to interact with you, and by extension, most other Muggles. Hopefully your lectures will convince both Muggles and wizards that one side does not have anything to fear from the other. We have a lot to learn from each other. Sanders nodded. I'm flattered, Strong Bear. I'd love to do this. Unfortunately, I have a full-time job. Strong Bear smiled. Your salary will be $200,000 American dollars per year, paid in pieces of gold bullion known as galleons. In addition, you will have the satisfaction of having helped a threatened minority adapt to a new way of life. Your work could very well save our people and our culture from destruction. Sanders stared at him. Wow, $200,000. I'll take that any time. I'll have to discuss this with Melissa, but I suspect she'll be happy. It's better than a dead-end job designing soda cans. Melissa is your wife, is she? Yes, she is. Is she employed? Not at the moment. Strong Bear nodded. She is also welcome to lecture as well, particularly to the women. However, she must not reveal anything she discovers about our community without express consent of me or one of my superiors. You will be under the same restriction as well. Do you accept? Sanders smiled. Absolutely, and I think she will as well. Will we have to relocate to Fourth Mesa in order to work for you? No, Mr. Sanders, you won't. All you need is a fireplace. Sanders stared at him. A fireplace. That is correct, Mr. Sanders. A fireplace. And judging from what I see here, you have one, albeit an electric one. That should be good enough, however. Great. I'll have to give my manager 2 weeks' notice and think of an excuse for leaving. I won't need to think hard for one, however. I'll start 3 weeks from today. Strong Bear looked at him, and it was impossible to miss the gratitude in the Navajo's face. Thank you for your help, Mr. Sanders. Our community will be in your eternal debt. Now, if you would excuse me, I have business to attend to. With that, the man left, and Sanders began wondering what life would be like among the wizards. Chapter 21. Never Have a Lion as a Pet. January 30, 1996, Morgan Residence, Washington. Deke United States of America. Michael Anthony Morgan was sitting in his living room, his eyes glued to the television. He replayed the tape over and over again. For the first time in his life, the 15-year-old boy cursed himself for studying in his room instead of watch football with his dad and brothers. Michael was, for lack of a better word, a geek. He played Dungeons and Dragons, had read and reread all the Lord of the Rings saga, had watched every episode of Star Trek, and had a collection of tarot cards. He loved the idea of magic and fantasy, and wished that someday some wizard or alien would come and whisk him away from this miserably boring place. During the game, he had been studying for a test. After the game, he got a call from his friend. Michael picked up the phone and was asked to come over. When Michael arrived, his friend, Zach, showed him a tape. Michael had no idea why Zach was showing him a recording of the Super Bowl until Zach showed him the commercial. Zach paused the tape suddenly during a commercial for some soda company. "See that?" Zach asked as he jabbed his finger against the TV screen. Michael leaned in and shrugged. "Looks like a bird." Zach shook his head and grabbed the remote. "Not exactly. See what happens when I clear up the picture." The image came into focus, and Michael gasped in shock. "Is that?" Zach answered before the question was done. "Yes, my friend, it is." Arnold, Michael's father, walked into the room. He sighed as he saw his son sitting there watching that damn VHS over and over again. He had been watching it for all day. Arnold was a large man, muscular. He had been on the high school and college football teams. His first son was everything he wanted. Star quarterback, ladies' man, the works. Michael, however. Arnold did not care that Michael had straight A's. He did not care that he was home studying while his older brother was off getting high or drunk with some girl. He saw his younger son as a disappointment. "Michael, enough of this." He walked over and grabbed the remote control. "No, Dad." Michael jumped up and pried the remote from his father's hands. "This is important. Everything we know, everything, is about to change." Arnold glared at him. "This is just a delusion brought on by your Dungeons and Dragons magic bull." He tried to grab the remote from his son's hand. Michael held tight, and a tug-of-war began over the remote. Due to the hitting of buttons, the tape ejected itself, and the television flipped through several channels. Michael finally was able to pry the remote away from his father a second time. Michael shook his head. "You're wrong, Dad, you're wrong." Arnold was about to knock some sense into Michael, literally, when he heard a noise. A long and annoying beep. Michael and Arnold turned their heads to see that the screen had changed. Now it was blue, but with a white circle in the center. Inside the circle was a bold eagle grasping arrows and olive branches. Around the side read, "Seal of the President of the United States of America." "We interrupt your scheduled program for an emergency announcement from the White House. Please stand by. We interrupt your scheduled program for an emergency announcement from the White House. Please stand by." The message repeated itself over and over. Arnold began to worry. Were the Russians attacking? Yeah, sure, they weren't commies anymore, but they still had reasons to attack. "Julia, Devin, get in here," he called to his wife and elder son as he sat down. Within moments, Julia walked in. She was wearing an apron from cooking. Then Devin walked in. He wore his high school jacket. "What's up, Pops?" "SHH, Michael hushed as the television said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." The screen cut to the Oval Office. William Jefferson Clinton sat there behind the desk where so many former presidents have given addresses to the nation. However, this address would be unlike any other. The president looked tired. He had been up most of the night. He had watched the game, seen the ad. Then he had been briefed by advisors and experts. One of their relatives had seen the ad and noticed something was wrong. They examined it themselves and decided to brief the president. As they spoke, he wasn't that surprised. For you see, 3 years ago, on January 21st, 1993, the day after he took office, he was visited by a special guest. January 21, 1993, White House, Washington. D.C. Clinton had won the election against Bush, become leader of the free world, and spent most of the previous day attending inaugural balls. He smiled to himself and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes, willing himself to relax after a harsh campaign. Whoosh! Just then, the famous Oval Office fireplace burst into flames. Clinton opened his eyes and peered at the flame. He didn't know the Oval Office fireplace was gas or automated, for that matter. He shrugged his shoulders and was about to close his eyes again when he noticed something. The flame was green, yet that was nothing compared to what had happened next. Whoosh, whoosh. Clinton almost fell out of his chair as two men walked out of the flames and into the office. Clinton immediately hollered, "Security, security," but no one answered. Little did the new president know that the room had been sealed off of sound coming in or going out by magic. He looked at the visitors more closely. Standing before him was a man in a velvet blue robe, and next to him, a man in a black robe. Odd dress, to say for sure. The man in the blue robe smiled and addressed, "Good evening, Mr. President. Please sit down." Clinton shook his head. "I'll stand, thank you. What the hell is going on here?" The man in blue sat down in a chair and said, "Mr. President, calm down, and we will explain everything." Over the next several minutes, the men introduced themselves. The man in blue was the Secretary of Magic, Travis Radner. The man in black was Radner's security guard. Clinton asked what they meant by Secretary of Magic. In response, Radner revealed the existence of magic and sorcery to the new president. At first, Clinton was, well, skeptical. "You can't honestly expect me to believe this." Radner sighed as he reached into his robe and pulled out a small wooden rod. Embedded into the rod was the hair of a coyote. Not the normal coyote that Muggles know of, but the magic shape-shifting coyote of Navajo legends. He examined the contents of the room, waved his wand, and muttered a transformation spell under his breath. In that instant, Socks the cat became a lion. Clinton almost had a heart attack. "Ah!" He jumped away from the lion as she roared and swiped her paw. Radner waved his wand and returned the cat to its true form. Clinton looked back at his guests. He was amazed, shocked, and terrified all at once. "You two are actually real wizards." The guard motioned to himself and the secretary. "Yes, Mr. President." Clinton was then told of the statute of secrecy. They explained that if anything within Wizard America were to cause a threat to Muggle, that is, non-magical America, then Clinton would be notified. Also, One every 6 months, the Secretary of Magic would report to the President. Clinton didn't understand. There is another American government run by wizards. Yes, Mr. President. We cover wizard-related issues in a world effectively parallel to yours. Why do you report to me then? Radner shrugged. We might not be Muggles, Mr. President, but we are all still Americans. So, several minutes of explaining, talking, and agreeing later, the two wizards stood up to leave. As they left, they kindly shook Clinton's hand and disappeared the way they had come, leaving the poor head of state baffled and confused. January 30, 1996, White House, Washington, D.C. Now, the secret was out. He had thought the anomaly a bird. However, then the advisors asked him to come to the Situation Room. They showed him the irrefutable proof what was on the ad, and that this was without a doubt real. They also pointed out the fact that there was a strange firework-like explosion at the Super Bowl that was unplanned, followed by mass accounts of amnesia. Clinton simply nodded and occasionally said things like, "Continue," and "I see." However, his vice president, Albert Gore, leaned over. He said, "Bill, we might have to address the nation." Clinton had been very uncomfortable with this. Yet Radner had been adamant that there was nothing that could be done at this point, at least in the US. The Secretary of Magic had stated quite bluntly that there was virtually no way to put the cat or lion back in the bag. So now here he was. After hours of internal debate, he had come to his decision. He was about to introduce America to a new society which they'd been unaware of for centuries. He hoped that the two civilizations would get along okay and not have one attempt to discriminate against or attack the other. He drew a deep breath and began. My fellow Americans, today I must reveal to you a shocking discovery, a discovery that may very well change the world as we know it. Arnold heard his son's voice say, "Told you so." Chapter 22. Clinton addresses the nation. January 30, 1996, the White House, Washington, D.C. United States of America. My fellow Americans. Today, I must reveal to you a shocking discovery, a discovery that may very well change the world as we know it. 3 years ago, shortly after my inauguration, I found myself face to face with two strange men in the middle of the Oval Office. These men had not been invited, and I was initially quite disturbed when I found myself in their presence. Normally, the White House security staff and the Secret Service would prevent intruders like these from entering. However, no one in the Secret Service had even considered the means by which these two people entered the room. I had been performing my duty as your president when the fireplace suddenly sprouted green flame. Yes, you heard me right, green flame. Needless to say, I was puzzled. Curiosity turned to absolute disbelief, however, when two men suddenly appeared amidst the green flames and stepped into the room. The men introduced themselves as Travis Radner and Roderick Grissom. Both were members of a secret society which even I, as your president, had not been aware of. They belonged to a society of wizards. Radner held the position of the United States Secretary of Magic. Grissom was a bodyguard, armed only with a small wooden stick I came to recognize as a wand. Needless to say, I was skeptical. However, Secretary Radner assured me that he was in fact an honest-to-goodness wizard and not some charlatan. He performed a most astonishing feat in my presence, one which completely proved his claim beyond a shadow of a doubt. He turned my cat, Socks, into a lion. My fellow Americans, you are probably thinking that I have lost my mind and that the work I have done during my 3 years of service as your president have managed to unhinge me. This is not the case, however. My faculties are still intact, and I intend to prove this to you. And there is only one way to do so. It is my pleasure to introduce the American Secretary of Magic, Travis Harold Radner. Secretary Radner was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, in 1918. He studied magic at the Smoky Mountain Institute of Magic, a secret magical school which I had no knowledge of until this man entered my life. He graduated in 6 years instead of the customary 7 and did so with highest honors. Immediately upon graduation, he began working in the Department of Magic, which he currently supervises. He has a strong track record of diplomacy and understands a great deal about the Muggle, that is non-magical, world. He served in the Allied Magical Corps during the Second World War and helped defend our nation from the threat of the evil wizard Grindelwald. Were it not for the Allied Magical Corps, the war could have concluded in a much more unpleasant manner. So, without any further ado, I give you Secretary Radner. Thank you, Mr. President, for that warm welcome. It is good to see you again. Now that the Super Bowl commercial with the wizard has been aired and America has discovered our community, I hope we will have more time to speak in the future. I believe we have a lot to learn from each other and that our cooperation will make America a much better place. My fellow Americans, I am Wizard Travis Radner. Yes, I am a wizard, and I will prove it right here and now. First things first, take a look at this object in my hand. It is a magic wand. It is made out of ordinary wood, in this case maple. It is powered by a hairby of a magical animal, one which you likely either have never heard of or believe to be mythical, the Navajo coyote. Most wizards carry wands like this. Of course, you may be thinking that it is just an ordinary stick. However, this stick will allow me to do things which most of the magicians you know would not be able to do, such as this. You will notice that Socks has grown in size and has not suffered any bad side effects. According to the physics you are familiar with, this is supposedly impossible. The animal's mass has increased, something which cannot be done without consuming an impractical amount of energy. Furthermore, scaling an animal up by a factor of 4 in each dimension causes the stress on the animal's legs to increase by a factor of 4. According to physics as you know it, this square cube issue would make it so the cat's legs will break as its size increases. This has clearly not happened. I will now allow people to take photographs of the enlarged Socks to prove that I have done what I have claimed and that I am a wizard. All ready now. Now allow me to revert the cat to its original size. Reducio. There, you see. Now Socks is back to her normal size. My fellow Americans, this should prove to you that wizards exist. We have been living among you quietly for centuries, protecting you from magical threats and helping you live in peace. You may wonder why we have not announced our existence until now. The reason is simple. There are very few of us, roughly 1 in every 10,000 humans, is capable of being trained as a wizard, and we feared that revealing ourselves will cause non-magical people like yourselves to come flocking to us in droves to fix things, create love potions, and so forth. Although we would be more than willing to help you create these objects if they are for a good purpose, there simply are not enough of us to go around and make everyone's dreams come true. How can we choose some people and not others? All of your dreams are worthy of our assistance. We cannot allow ourselves to show favoritism. Furthermore, there are several feats which we are incapable of performing even with magic, and we don't want to get everyone's hopes up that magic can fix everything. We have also hidden our community because people have often feared wizards and witches in the past and persecuted us because of the actions of a few misguided wizards. You are probably aware of the Salem witch fiasco. This occurred after someone made a mistake in colonial America and accidentally let slip that she was a witch. The authorities immediately started fearing and executing witches and wizards. We are only revealing ourselves now because it is only a matter of time until you find out now that the Super Bowl commercial with the wizard, yes, the bird is in fact a British youth wizard on a broomstick, has been aired. I would like to emphasize that this filming was completely accidental. Normally, wizards try to make sure that they are not being recorded while they are casting spells. In some cases, we are forced to modify people's memories to think that they were actually birds, aircraft, and other non-magical objects. In this case, however, we were overtasked with other duties and unaware of the blast commercial until it was too late to stop the leak. My fellow Americans, you have nothing to fear from us. We are ordinary human beings just like you. We have our own lives, hopes, and dreams. We follow a strict code of ethics and have a correctional facility for dealing with wizards who hurt people. Yes, we have a few bad apples. However, doesn't every community? That's what jails are for, and we wizards have very good jails. Think of wizardry as a profession. We have software engineers to program computers, a feat which other people think is extremely difficult. There are professional athletes who perform feats no one else thinks possible. We wizards are like that as well. We use magic to do things no one else thinks possible, just different things from the software engineer and athlete. Now, my fellow Americans, I will show you a magical creature. Let me get the cage out. Here it is. Can you give me a hand with this? Thank you, sir. What we have here, my friends, is a juvenile dwarf unicorn. This is a female about a couple of years old. Note the nub on the top of her head. This will eventually become her horn. When fully grown, she will be about half the size of an adult horse. Her name is Deirdre. Isn't she cute? With your permission, Mr. President, I will take a sample of her DNA so that scientists can confirm that she is of a species unknown to Muggles, though most certainly in the equine family. Thank you, Mr. President. All right, Deirdre, this won't hurt a bit. Anesthesio, see. All done. Mr. President, here it is. Take good care of it. You can keep Deirdre as a pet. She's quite tame and will eat virtually every vegetable and leaf she'll get her hands on. My only recommendation is that she be cared for by women as she gets older, as unicorns are partial to females. I think that's all for now, Mr. President. With your permission, I'll get out of here and get back to work. Thank you, Mr. President, and I hope to see you soon. Now, if you would turn that camera to the fireplace, you will be able to see me leave. Thank you, my fellow Americans, for your attention. If you need the service of a wizard, just ask for it. If we are around and believe your request is justified, we will try to help you. For the time being, farewell there, my fellow Americans, you have it. A wizard vanishing from the Oval Office in a blast of green fire, and a mythical animal sitting in a cage on my desk. As your president, Secretary Radner reports to me. The president is very likely the only non-magical person who is aware of the magical community's existence, at least until the airing of the Super Bowl ad. This will very likely change over the next few weeks as wizards slowly begin to come out of the closet. I have met several wizards and assure you that they are decent people. They will not turn you into frogs or hit you with lightning bolts. Many people you know, including famous religious figures, were actually wizards and used their skills in magic to perform miracles. They want to live their lives in peace, just as you do. As your president, it is incumbent upon me to ensure that they get a chance to do so. There will be no discrimination against wizards in the United States of America. They are Americans and human beings, just like you and me. The wizards, as Secretary Radner says, comprise a tiny minority of the population. Attacks on them could be a sentence of genocide and would be covered under the Nuremberg War Crimes Code. Most of you will never see a wizard or witch in your entire lives. They keep to themselves for the most part, and when they do come into our world, they try to leave as little evidence as possible. You have been living with the wizards all these years and have felt no ill effects. They intend to continue this policy. The only difference is that you know they exist. It is my hope that one day we will be able to combine technology and magic in ways which will result in the improvement of the life of Americans and people all over the world. And now, with no further ado, we will show the commercial which exposed the community, this time with enhanced video. In the commercial, a juvenile British wizard is flying behind the actors in the Blast commercial on a broomstick. The picture is clear, and there is no mistake. There will be a lot of discussion on this, I'm sure, in the near future. However, one day at the time. Thank you for your attention. Chapter 23, Dumbledore's Announcement. January 30, 1996, Great Hogwarts School of Witchcraft, and wizardry great Britain, the statute of secrecy had been breached beyond any chance of repair. Rumors had been swirling throughout the school for hours now. Harry Potter had been expelled for causing the breach. Muggles were about to attack Hogwarts. Dumbledore had been expelled and had been succeeded by Professor Umbridge. The rumors got wilder and more sensational by the telling, and had reached the point where all they were doing was getting the student body more frightened. Professor Dumbledore had called the staff into his tower a few hours ago. There had been no word from the teachers since. At first, the students were pleased at their unexpected free time. However, as the meeting dragged on, even students who didn't interact much with Harry knew that something quite serious had occurred. Hermione had gotten one glimpse of Professor Umbridge rushing out of Dumbledore's tower, heading into the women's bathroom. The hated woman looked absolutely mortified. Hermione actually pitied her. Cornelius Fudge was probably going berserk over the Super Bowl ad, and as a result, his agent at Hogwarts would likely be under the microscope as well. Right now, Hermione and all her schoolmates were crowded into the Great Hall for an emergency meeting. The nature of the emergency had not been communicated, which caused most of the school to speculate that the meeting was due to the breaching of the statute. The meeting was considered mandatory for all students, something which had not happened ever since Cedric Diggory's death during the Triwizard Tournament. The meeting had been called for 7:30. It was now 7:45, and there were still no teachers in sight. Harry Potter was not at the Gryffindor table, which occasioned worried comments from three houses and sneers from Slytherin. It appeared, at least from what was visible to the students in general, that the rumors about Harry being expelled were widely accepted as fact. Finally, at about 7:55, the teachers filed into the room. There wasn't a happy face among them. Dumbledore's usually confident, calm face was actually ruffled. McGonagall was crying. Perhaps even more surprising, the Slytherin snickers about Harry Potter were squelched by none other than Severus Snape himself. Saint Potter, worst enemy. The potions master even went so far as to dock 5 points from his own house. Whatever had occasioned this meeting went far beyond internal Hogwarts politics. Finally, Dumbledore came to his feet and walked to the podium. All of the students cut off their conversations and stood to face the headmaster. Dumbledore took a deep breath and slowly shook his head. "Good evening, students of Hogwarts. I apologize for the short notice, but I have important information to relay to you, information which will likely change life at Hogwarts and in all likelihood the entire wizarding community forever." The headmaster paused for emphasis. The statute of secrecy has been broken beyond repair. Word of the existence of the wizarding world is rapidly making its way throughout the Muggles. I have it on good authority that the President of the United States has issued a press release confirming the existence of wizards. This press release included a demonstration of magic by the American Secretary of Magic, Travis Radner. Secretary Radner is the American equivalent of our own Cornelius Fudge. This announcement was seen by millions of people all over that country. The Oblivators in the United States, and increasingly all over the world, are beginning to admit that there is nothing they can do to prevent the leak from spreading. A little under half a year ago, several members of the Order of the Phoenix were escorting our own Harry Potter from his safe house on Privet Drive to a secret location in London. The convoy's course took them over the Thames at night. By sheer chance, an American Muggle beverage company was recording footage for an advertisement from a boat on the Thames. The recording devices picked up images of Harry and two other wizards on their broomsticks. The various Order of the Phoenix members all thought someone else in the group was going to handle the obliviation of the recording crew, so no one actually did it. This allowed the Muggles to keep their memories and the recorded images. By the time the Oblivators caught up with the people who had witnessed Harry flying by on the broom, the secret was out. The advertisement had been aired at an extremely popular American Muggle sporting event. It was as if the advertisement with Harry on the broomstick had been shown during the finals of the International World Cup. As a result, everyone saw him. Everyone. People started muttering at this. Hermione watched the horror spread across the faces of her classmates, including those of Draco Malfoy and the Slytherins, as the scope of the breach became evident. This violation of the Statute of Secrecy, now known as the Super Bowl breach, nearly triggered an international incident. The American wizards were furious that we in Britain didn't catch the leak before it spread across the pond. Cornelius Fudge was pestered to do something to save his image. What he did, unfortunately, will have ripple effects on our community here at Hogwarts. The students stopped talking at once. Dumbledore sighed. First and foremost, Cornelius had to show that he was intent on punishing the people responsible for the leak. He has already shown animosity to me and to Harry Potter, so he took this opportunity to cast the two of us as scapegoats. No one spoke. Cornelius demanded that Harry be punished for this crime, even though Harry never did anything wrong. An innocent boy would be sacrificed just to make a political statement. The students started screaming at this, even a few of the Slytherins. The teachers looked on with horror, with one exception, Umbridge. The defense against the dark arts teacher just stared at Dumbledore with loathing in her face. Needless to say, I care about all my students, and as a result, I argued with him vehemently about his proposal. He then took advantage of the situation to attack me. He said that I was also somewhat responsible, and that if I did not resign from Hogwarts, I would be sent to Azkaban. Dumbledore paused. I could not allow myself to stand by while one of my students suffered, so I agreed. I will be retiring at the end of this school year. Professor McGonagall will be taking over as headmistress, with Professor Umbridge as her deputy. Cornelius, however, was adamant that Harry be suspended, and there was nothing I could do about it. So he will be leaving, effective immediately, and I will be retiring at the end of the year. The students erupted. Hermione, of course, let her bravado get in the way. Professor Dumbledore, you can't leave us. You've done wonders for our school. The students roared their approval, including many of the Slytherins. Dumbledore stared sadly at her. Miss Granger, I am flattered by your support. I have done my best to help my students, and if my resignation is necessary to help improve their lot in life, then so be it. Besides, I'm not resigning yet. We still have work to do. The students cheered, as did most of the staff. The sole exception, of course, was the vulture in the pink blouse. We have to start preparing ourselves for exposure to the Muggle world. Effective immediately, Muggle studies will become a mandatory part of our curriculum. Potions and Muggle studies will swap places in the weekly schedule so that double Muggle studies classes will take place every day. It is our hope that these additional classes will help train you to deal with Muggles once they come to visit us. Dumbledore paused once more. I expect you to be on your best behavior, my students. Our first guests will be none other than our Prime Minister, the Honorable John Major, and Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth Roman II. These two people need to know us better to understand our needs, and we need to know them better as well if we are to interact with them. We will likely be visited by other dignitaries as well. I have it on good authority that the Grand Mugwump himself, His Excellency Anastasios Dialynis, will be coming here to speak with us. Dumbledore leaned over the podium. Students, this is quite possibly the gravest crisis the wizarding world has faced since the Statute of Secrecy was instituted hundreds of years ago. Life will never be the same after the Super Bowl breach, for either us or the Muggles. Regardless of what happens, I will ensure that you will be ready to face whatever our new world has to offer. That is all for now, my friends. Good night, and I will see you on the morrow. Chapter 24, Pope John Paul the What? January 31, 1996, His Holiness Pope John Paul is Balkanist. Peter's Basilica Vatican, Citerome. Good afternoon, my flock. I hope you are doing well today. I am here to comment on the remarkable events which have recently taken place in the United States. As most of you know by now, or have suspected, footage of teenagers flying on broomsticks was aired during a commercial during the Super Bowl, the championship match of American football. President Clinton himself has acknowledged that these individuals are in fact wizards. Furthermore, he allowed a wizard to demonstrate his magical abilities on television. My friends, I would like to inform you that we have known about these individuals for a long time. We all know that God gives out gifts to every single individual. The nature of his gifts may change from person to person. In some cases, it may be superior strength. In other cases, it may be great intellect. And in a few, exceedingly rare cases, it may be magic. Yes, I know the quote. Exodus 22:18 clearly states that God's chosen people must not suffer a witch to live. Indeed, there have been times where individuals with this ability have been persecuted ruthlessly. Whether or not persecution occurred often depended on who sat on the throne of St. Peter. This is what triggered the statute of secrecy to begin with, in all likelihood. Depending on the beliefs of my predecessors on the throne of St. Peter, these innocent men and women may have experienced years of pain and suffering at the hands of the church. Here is my opinion on this matter. The witches God was concerned about were those who deliberately use their abilities to hurt other people. I believe that the Almighty may have also intended the decree to include those beings who worship primitive idols. With this in mind, let me telling you what we know about these wizards. These witches are God's creatures just like us. They have lives, hopes, and dreams. God has endowed them with a gift and given them the judgment and courage to use it wisely. For the most part, these people have done so. I must acknowledge that there are a few dark wizards here and there, people who are in fact a danger to the community. Rest assured, however, that the Holy See has a long tradition of working with international authorities to ferret out and capture these witches. Some of you may argue that these witches are pagans, which in turn forces them to be persecuted under the Almighty's second interpretation. This is not true, however. The vast majority of these individuals worship the one God, not the Melech or Baal of the Canaanite traditions. Many of them have quotes from God's great works on their tombstones. Most of them are keenly aware that he provided them with this ability and thank him routinely for this gift. Does God seriously expect us to execute someone who used magic to help save a drowning man? Does he demand that we kill someone simply because he used unusual means to get a frightened cat out of a tree? I suspect that he would be most distressed if we allowed people to repay good with evil, especially in his name. The branch of the Vatican studying witches and wizards has reason to believe that many of the people we revere today as religious heroes, prophets, and seers may have in fact be wizards. Not all of them, certainly, but many of them. God has providing people with these gifts ever since society began, and for the most part, these fortunate individuals have used their gifts for good. Consider the biblical character Balaam. This man actually was a Canaanite wizard, one which normally would have subjected to God's decree that witches be exterminated. However, God had other plans for him. Balaam eventually used his ability to bless the nascent Israelite community, even though he had been instructed to curse the Israelites. Without Balaam's intervention, the Israelites may not have made it to the promised land. The key here is that even in cases where a pagan witch would nominally be covered by Exodus 22:18, God's people should not automatically assume that these individuals must be harmed. What would have happened to our community had Balaam been executed on the spot? If the pagan witches are doing good deeds, they are doing God's work and must be spared. If they are doing evil deeds, they should be seen as sinners and given a chance to redeem themselves in the eyes of the Lord. Remember that God always has his hand open as long as a sinner is alive. All the sinner has to do is take his hand. I will now prove to you that wizards can be benevolent. There are forces of spiritual chaos and discontent in the world, as we all know. God is aware of this, however, and has given us these powers to help deal with this better. It is therefore not uncommon for wizards to be given priority over non-wizards for high religious office. If you think about it, who would you have faced the evil one? A wizard or someone with no magical powers? With this in mind, I am about to divulge an amazing fact which has been hidden in the church for centuries. Theoretically, in order to become Supreme Pontiff, you should be a practicing wizard who successfully graduated from a magical training academy somewhere on Earth. In order to be a cardinal, you should be at least capable of learning magic. Part of the rituals for nominating a candidate to the papacy involve asking for him to demonstrate that he can indeed control magic to the point where they can fight off evil creatures such as demons and dragons. This is the reason for the secrecy of the conclave. Doing this check out in the open would expose the existence of wizards. More often than not, there are no wizards available in the conclave, so the conclave elects a muggle, an ordinary individual. It so happens, however, that I am a wizard. In theory, a Catholic female wizard takes priority over a Catholic male non-wizard. However, the rarity of wizards and the long-standing custom that the candidate already be a leading church official has made it virtually impossible for a woman to become pope. There has only been one female pope, a Pope Joan. Her election surprised many people, and the church overreacted and had her deposed. I am reminding people of this fact to make sure that this deposition does not happen again in case a future female pope is elected. There is no reason a woman cannot be elected pope if she is capable of spellcasting. This requirement is not unique to the Catholic Church. Most other religious communities require the same ability for their supreme leaders. Again, not all, but most. I suspect that these spiritual leaders are busy explaining this surprising fact to their worshippers right now. And as for your proof, I will give it to you right now. Right before me I have a dove, the universal symbol of peace. Now watch this. As this bird flies away, let this beautiful creature remind us all that wizards are peaceful people and should not be persecuted under any circumstances, lest the persecutors defy the will of God. May God bless you all and keep you. Thank you for your attention.